Welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. This is a podcast that looks at new marketing technology, what it is, how it works, and some expert opinion on that topic. And I am very lucky today to be joined by two guys representing different parts of advertising history. Can I say that? Is that fair? Two people I've enjoyed working with, spending time with, talking with, drinking with, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
I'm Patrick Collister, and when you talk about history, I've got quite a lot of it, unfortunately. I've been in advertising 40 years.
Well, I'm Susan McGuigan from Leicester. I'm Dave Birss. I used to be in advertising. I was in advertising for about 20 years, and then I quit about 8 years ago. And I quit, but I seem to be attached to the industry by a bungee cord, keep coming back again and again. But at the moment, I'm writing a book, another book. I just released one about 6 weeks ago, writing another one. And I don't know why I keep doing it, because it's a nightmare.
And you tell us anything about the book?
The book is about 200 pages.
Right,
yeah,
okay, well,
yeah.
that's a scintillating description.
Let me tell you about my book. I read a book, my book came out 10 months ago, called How to Use Innovation and Creativity in Business. And actually, I'm really chuffed that it's had 11 Amazon 5-star reviews, and only one of them by someone I know. So
fantastic. Well done.
10 people have read it, and one person did say to me, a friend of mine said he'd read my book, and he sounded rather surprised. He said, I enjoyed it. What did you like most about it? I asked. He said, it was short.
There we go. I've got 20% of the way through your book, and I put it down intentionally because the book that I'm writing at the moment is about creativity and innovation, and I don't want to be over-influenced because there was stuff in it that, oh man, I want to pinch that. So it's like, I had to put your book down
that is
until after I've finished writing my book, because otherwise, it'd be...
Otherwise your book won't be a better book. Exactly.
I just changed the spelling mistakes in your one and put it back out again.
How many books have you done now?
About 5, but a couple of them have been like private commissions. I did one that was I co-authored a book that came out about 6 weeks ago with a friend called Sun Yu. Sun was head of innovation for Vanity Fair Corporation, who are the holding company for Napa Peary, the North Face, Timberland, Vans, about 20 big fashion brands. And he'd done some research with BMW, and we took that research and turned it into a methodology, which is how to use innovation not as this high-risk, high-cost disruption thing that everyone's been talking about for years, but actually to go, well, here's how the long-term innovative companies actually use it to grow their brand and to grow their products over time and to cement it in the hearts of their audience, because everyone else is trying to do this disruptive leap, and it's bullshit. So I believe that that's the reason why 94% of CEOs are dissatisfied with innovation, is because they're trying to do these leaps that mean that everyone has to unlearn that to relearn this. And huge risk, massive cost. Why would you do that? So that's not my approach.
And remind me of the title of that, because I can put it in the show notes.
It's Iconic Advantage.
Iconic Advantage.
You can find it on Amazon. We somehow made it to be a bestseller the week before it was launched. I don't know how that works, but bestseller flag went up. It's like, we're not even launched yet.
And Patrick, for the listeners, if they want to be the 12th reviewer,
it's available on Amazon. I'm not sure how I feel about this. The book is only £6.99 at cover price, and already the bastards have discounted it. You can get it for under £4. Half of me says, this is marvellous, liberating knowledge, and the other half goes, fucking cheapskates.
And what's it called? Remind me.
It's got a scintillating title that could probably do with a bit of it itself. It's called How to Use Innovation and Creativity in Business. I also published Directory magazine, www.directnewideas.com. if people are remotely interested in innovations in communications, that's what we deal with.
We will come back at the end for the best way to get in touch with you. So no more display ads within this podcast, please. I
interrupt this podcast for a small announcement.
Yeah, I'm thinking of selling my bicycle. If anyone's interested,
I've got a very good wife, actually. If anyone fancies,
I don't know where this is going, Patrick. I'm feeling uncomfortable.
So, as is customary on this podcast, I'm going to start with a couple of short questions so that listeners can get to know you a little bit better before we dive into the shiny new object of the week. So, Patrick, other than your own book, what is the one marketing book you recommend the most often or have bought for people on a regular basis?
Well, call me weird, but actually I read books. And I know a lot of people don't these days. They download PDFs. But I do read a lot of books. At the moment, I suppose I've got about 3 on the go. I'm reading Nicole Yershon's Rough Diamond, which is the story of how she tried to change the big culture of a big agency, and eventually they got rid of her. I guess there are several influential books. Brand Bubble, when a couple of really clever planners in New York took a look at the stock exchange and then looked at the statistics of depreciating brand values while stock values are increasing. So there's a potential catastrophe about to happen there. Probably the best marketing book was Mark Sherrington's Added Value. He managed to actually start a marketing consultancy called the Added Value Company out of that, but it was a fantastic book. It's about 10 years old.
What was in that kind of you responded to? So,
well, an awful lot of marketing these days is science. It's driven by data, and it's actually incredibly difficult to wrap your brain around unless you're an econometrist. And what Mark Sherrington did was make the art side of marketing understandable, and he gave clear direction as to how you can achieve success, but without it being mumbo jumbo. Really, really good book.
And how about you, Dave? Other than your own books,
I love one of my favourite books. I must have bought it 5 or 6 times and given it away or had it pinched out of agencies. A Smile in the Mind. I just absolutely love that book. It's design really, but it's a bit conceptual design. It's really gorgeous.
And who wrote that?
I can't remember, but it's
and that's about design specifically?
Yeah. And then there's for copywriting. Remember Alistair Crompton's book, The Craft of Copywriting? It used to be around all the agencies.
No, there was Luke Sullivan's book, Hey Whipple, Squeeze
Whipple,
This.
Yes. Absolutely phenomenal. I love one of the chapters in that is called Pecked to Death by Ducks. And it describes what happens very often when you have an idea, and as soon as you put it in front of clients, they start making little changes. And the whole idea is that, one peck from a duck won't do you any damage. But when you get pecked 1,000 times by ducks, those little, what seem like innocuous changes, it can kill everything. And I just love this concept, being pecked to death by ducks, because, we've been there.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
So it's interesting for you both to mention, do you remember seeing this book around the agency? Patrick, was that something, looking back, that there was a kind of library? Because my short experience in this industry, there's always fancy sounding books on the shelves. I've never seen anyone look at them, pick them up, or let alone read them. Is that a new thing, or did people always used to have a kind of?
No, there used to be a library
of books.
No, there really was, and actually, fascinatingly, a guy called Steve Harrison. After he got his PhD in history, the only job he could get was as the librarian at Ogilvy and Mather. And it was while he was the librarian, looking after the books, he began to find out about copy, and then bit by bit he ended up as a copywriter, and then founded his own agency that he sold to WPP for a very great sum of money. But those were the days agencies did have libraries.
So, moving on slightly, What is the most useful thing that you've bought with your own money, Dave, that you've used for work? So not something that the company or the publisher or whoever that's given you, but something you've bought with your own cash that's been super useful at work.
This will sound ridiculous, but a jacket.
A jacket?
Yeah.
So you don't get cold?
Yeah. I come from Scotland. So for years, I was just the typical scruffy creative with the, here I am, I'm actually right now, get the Converse, get the jeans on, get the t-shirt. Now, one of the things that I would find actually is that when you walk into a client's offices, and I would walk in very often, I'd be the scruffy guy with the leather jacket, and they look at you, you're out of place, and you don't get the respect. And the one thing is that a decent suit jacket was enough to make people feel as if, okay, you're one of us. You're enough, you're relating to us enough to be respected. And I for years did not understand that, the importance of a little bit of smartness, a little bit of wearing the uniform so that people can go, you're one of us, you're not an alien.
When I was the executive creative director of Ogilvy, my chairman sent me off to a style consultant, and basically she told me I should be wearing suits, bottle green. She wanted me to wear bottle green suits, and she took me to a shop and tried to get me to buy an Armani suit for nearly £1,000. And I declined to do all of this because I happen to be the way I am. But it was really interesting. It got me to think that the way people perceive you is really important. So when people came to a big agency like Ogilvy, the creative director, well, there's frisson of excitement. And I used to wander in looking like the geography teacher. And so if that worried other people, then suddenly I thought, what's the judo throw? How do I turn being a geography teacher into my shtick, if you like? And so I began to use new business pitches as opportunities to run training seminars for clients. So I mean, I'd use flip charts and try and explain how things worked. And so that's sort of my moment as well, when I thought, okay, be true to yourself, but on the other hand, be aware of your audience too.
Yeah. So my slight experience of that is, when I was relatively new to the industry, I thought, yeah, I'll get a suit jacket, look the part, and wear jeans and brogues. Certainly in the new business role that I was in. But then I did a conference where there was a panel of 4 middle-class white blokes, all wearing exactly the same thing. And from that point onwards, I was just like, I can't. I think the opposite is also true, right? At some point, if you don't dress and look a bit different, then people aren't going to even think you're capable of it.
My friend Lazar Zamek has just returned to Serbia, and he's now professor of marketing at the university there.
Yeah.
And his very first day, his very first class, he turned up in board shorts, Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops, and of course scandalising the rest of the academic staff. But he said, hey, I used to work at Google. It's really important that people know that my course is going to be cool.
Yeah.
So looking at other areas of your career, what have been your biggest work failures that have consequently set you up for success? What are those classic gaffes or projects that have gone horribly wrong that you look back on and think, I'm so glad that was a disaster, because that means I am now doing the thing that I'm doing?
Well, I've been the creative director of a top ad agency. We were number 2 at the time. I was the creative director of a leading direct marketing agency. I think we were either 1 or 2 at the time. And then I went to Google, and so I worked in digital. And the reason for all of those is because I kept getting fired. And so when you get sacked for one reason or another, what you do is you take a look at what's in front of you. So some people think that I've managed to reinvent myself, and actually I haven't. It's been force majeure. So in many ways I'm incredibly grateful for all of that to happen, because otherwise, if I'd stayed at Ogilvy, I'd still be doing TV ads and maybe bit of kind of viral video man or whatever. Instead of which, I've been forced to learn about how communication really works.
So can you get specific about that? I mean, I get that at a higher level, but can you talk about why you got sacked from one agency and when you looked at everything in front of you? Like, what was your thought process? Just put yourself in the mind of someone who might be in this position.
Yeah, I was pretty... I suppose I wasn't sacked from Ogilvy, but I ran out of room there. I was the vice chairman and I got a new chairman, and we both regarded each other with incomprehension. He thought that the creative director of a big agency like that was like their star performer, because he came from a really small agency. And he was amazed that I spent as much time as I did with clients. But actually that was my job, to explain creativity to clients and to nurture creative ideas with them so that they didn't feel hostile to them, they felt part of the process. So I got a new chairman in, and he simply wanted to reinvent the wheel in his own way. And I also thought that he was a numpty. And by the way, he got walked off the premises 2 years later, which doesn't often happen to chairman.
And you said that made you incredibly angry. I understand that, but how did you then turn that anger into like positive action? How did you turn that situation around?
I started a business almost immediately. I started two, in fact, and so the first business I started was probably the first ever crowdsourcing creative website. I started that in 2000, called Creative Matters. And the promise was a 100-hour turnaround of creative work by freelancers, every one of whom had a gold from Cannes. And interestingly, I mean, it was very successful pretty quickly. People weren't interested in the rapid turnaround. What they were interested in was help from people who were really good at it. And the second thing I started doing was training. I set up a training company. And that's more or less continued actually over the last 18 years. I still train people to think, do stuff.
And how about you, Dave? Does that sound familiar? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've learned from Patrick, and I've quit before I've been fired a lot of the time before I get discovered. But yeah, it's having the... I think I find it very difficult when people say, "What's your career?" Because I can't even say my career is advertising. I've done so many things. You know, I've directed TV shows. I've written music for film. I've done so many different things, and I just love the exploration and the journey with everything. I can look back and there's a lens that you can apply to my career and say that I've failed at a whole string of things. Or there's the lens that you can go as actually, what I've done is I'm just so restless and curious that I just have to keep moving.
But get specific. Give me a time when you ballsed it up and you thought, oh man, and then you went through that transformation.
Well, one of my first jobs in advertising, I, like Patrick, I got someone into the company. I got in an art director to work with me, and I'd just recently become a copywriter. I'd been an art director, I became a copywriter. And so I got an art director, and this guy had picked up a D&AD recently, and I was up in Scotland. This is quite a glamorous thing, up in Scotland, having somebody who just picks up a D&AD. So started working with this guy, and within the first 2 hours I knew I'd made a mistake, as he was saying no to everything I was coming up with. And not just saying no, he actually was putting me down and saying, that's a terrible idea, come on, think of something better than that, think of something. And what happened was that after 2 weeks, what your brain adjusts to this, and when you're getting that amount of negative feedback, your brain goes, no, I'm not going to go through that pain anymore, and it shut down. I couldn't come up with any ideas. 2 months later I get fired because I wasn't doing my job, and I thought that was it. I can't do this anymore. My brain doesn't work anymore. I can't come up with ideas. And I get fired on the Friday morning, and I packed up my boxes and took them downstairs to reception, and I made phone calls, and I got this an appointment with a creative director in the afternoon. I went to see this creative director in the afternoon, and he looked through my portfolio and was like, yeah, really nice stuff in there, great. Do you have a couple of hours? I was like, yeah, sure. I said, I just want to give you a little test. I've got a couple of briefs here. I want to give you an hour to work on those 2 briefs. And I did. I worked on it, and I absolutely went for it. At the end of the hour, on each of those briefs, I'd come up with a whole bunch of scamps of ads, but I'd actually then, because I can art direct and I can copyright, I had scamped up the best ad for each of them, and I'd written the full copy for each of them. And I handed him these things, and he's just like, I love the ideas, but I cannot believe you've taken it to this level. When can you start? Can you start on Monday? And I started the following Monday, 2.5 times, earning 2.5 times what I was earning at the job I'd just been fired at. And
so interesting. There was a key point in that story where you said that you'd taken so much external criticism that it disrupted your creative process.
Yeah,
and like I'm very familiar with that. With when you're in a band, and I think there's a kind of a mindset for creativity. I think you've got to be confident and comfortable for it to kick off. So it was interesting that you lost faith, but you have the confidence and the goal just to throw yourself back into it. So, Patrick, how do you get out of a creative rut?
Apart from the heroin.
It's really interesting. I don't know is the answer. Either because I've stayed in the rut and it's been quite cosy. I mean, I'm really fascinated by articles about where people work best and where people get their ideas best, because actually I sit down at a desk, and when I sit down at a desk, whatever's in front of me, I start thinking about it. So every morning I have an hour at 7 trying to write the novel. Boomf. As Stephen King said, if you're going to be a writer, you have to write. So I'm forcing myself to write. When it comes to...
And what's your regimen for that? So you get up, have breakfast at 6:30 and then...
No, I get up at 7 and I'm at my typewriter at
first thing.
7:30. I try and write from 7:30 till 9. If Julie's in the office, she comes in too damned early, and so that disrupts that. I tell you what, though, if you're looking about real discipline, I mean, Peter Suter, when he was running Abbott Mead Vickers as creative director, also wanted to write for TV. He was getting up at 4:30 every morning to put in 2.5 hours before going to do a full day's work. Wow. I mean, honestly, I find that both inspiring and
great
amazing.
Story, and it sounds very Hollywood, but I'm suspicious how long you can keep that up for. Because if you get up at 4:30, what time have you got to go to bed?
Well, what Peter did say to me is really interesting. He said, I'm very lucky because I've never drunk alcohol.
Yeah.
There's a lesson for us.
There is, I think. I mean, Napoleon once said a man needs 6 hours sleep a night, a woman 7, a cretin 8. And that, I'm afraid I'm probably a cretin.
So that's a great little soundbite. So if you had a massive £10 million media budget to project any message on digital channels, you could take over whatever, buy all the banners you want, all the Facebook ads you wanted, you could put any message out there. It could be a word of advice.
Does it have to be a message?
No,
because it would be a message. I'd like to create a digital wall all along the Mexican border to show how pointless spending that money would be, and how ridiculous, because of course you'd be able to walk straight through it.
And what would you put? What would be on your digital?
I don't know, I just want it to be a political statement.
You'd create some digital out of home.
I'd like to create a digital wall. Yeah, exactly. In other words, it's chimerical. It's a hologram. It's ridiculous. The whole concept is insane. Actually, that's a really bad idea. I suddenly thought about it. I mean, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be great to build this digital wall just so that then everyone would know how fucking mad Trump is to want to build a real one.
On that wall, you could have a video of what was behind the wall, so it just completely transparent.
No, that's brilliant. You're absolutely right, because on that digital wall, what you could do is you could post anything you want, actually, about the ridiculousness of walls generally.
How about you, Dave? 10 million quid.
It would be a public service campaign, which is just to get people to start using their minds. Because I think that most people in their lives, I mean, we know that through all the sort of Amos Tversky kind of work, is that 80% of people's thinking is on autopilot. 20% is actual conscious thought, and that's the sort of Kahneman thinking fast and slow stuff. And I think that in businesses are set up in such a way that they discourage thought, and I think that that's a really, really sad thing.
Give me an example of that.
Well, the whole thing is that the businesses are about norms, about conforming to a norm. Here's the way that we do things around here. This is our systems, this is our process, this is the assumed knowledge that we have, this is our culture, this is what it takes to be a whatever kind of person. And what that does is it limits people, and people don't want to come up with an original idea. They don't want to come up with something that breaks that. So any thinking that they do is within this very autopilot norm of an organisation. And I think that's a really sad way to live. I think that people go through life on autopilot, and they fail to see the beauty in the things that are around us, the little weeds in the gutter, and I would just like people to start trying to have original thought rather than conforming to what everyone else is saying.
So I think that's a lovely idea and a great use of a £10 million budget. So if someone's listening to this podcast and they're thinking, my God, he's right, I really believe in what Dave's saying, how do you do that? I know it might be obvious to three of us as creative people, different guises. How would someone who's just seen the light from hearing that statement, what are the kind of three simple things you can practically do to think differently in the way that you described?
Build a digital wall.
Allow anyone to have digital graffiti on it. I think that so there are a certain number of things that you can do to try and do that. I think first of all you need to start consuming stuff that's out with your own norm. Because one of the things that happens over life is that I guess the term for it might be comfort zone, whatever it is, our comfort zone, our norms, our understandings of life, they get smaller over time until you end up being a bitter old racist in an old folks' home in the South Coast. I don't know. If you're listening to this and you're a bitter old racist in the South Coast, I apologise. But the only way to stop that from happening, from ending up at the end of your life being the smallest, narrowest-minded person you've ever been throughout your whole existence, the only way to do that is to keep pushing the edges of your boundary, keep doing things that are new, keep giving yourself experiences, keep learning new skills. And if you do that, you end up the biggest person at the end of your days, not the smallest person. And that's one thing that I think is really important. Another thing is to surround yourself by people who inspire you. And I think that very often people will end up, if you hang around with a bunch of people who have got no ambition, no interest in life, they're not challenging, then you end up being like them. And it's not to say get rid of your friends, if that's who your friends are. It's just to say make sure that you also hang out with people who are inspiring, open-minded, are people who will want you to be a bigger and better person. And I think if there was a third thing, it might be about actually having a vision to want to do something, to make a mark in this world. Because there's a quote that I use from a Tom Waits song. It's a very... it sounds as if I'm about to preach to you when I tell you the title of the song is Jesus Gonna Be Here. But the song's not like that. But he's got this line in it that I use to try and sort of measure, will I do this or not? And the line is, I want to make this place better than the way I found it was. And I think that if we all had that kind of mantra, that kind of approach, then everyone's existence in this planet would make the planet better. And I think that's a beautiful thing for us all to aim for.
And that'd be nice for your digital budget. Although my favourite Tom Waits line is slightly less ambitious, and it's fishing for a good time starts with throwing in your line, which is it's a great excuse to have a drink.
Small change got rained on 38. Do you remember that one? Yeah.
So
diamonds on the windshield of my car. Great, that marvelous voice.
I'm going to have to pay royalties now on that. No. That's fine. So, just at the end of the getting to know you round, if you were advising a bright young grad who's smart and driven and wanted to get into digital marketing, what would be your advice?
I guess with anything that you want to get into, you need to learn the rules first. And once you learn the rules, you can break them. And it's the one thing where I remember when people were talking about how, this is the year, but 5 years ago, wasn't it? This is the year that millennials are going to be hitting the workplace. This is the year that the people who've grown up only ever knowing the internet are going to hit the workplace. This is going to make a massive difference. No, it didn't make any difference whatsoever. Because people, when they come into a workplace, they have to understand how things work. They don't come in and instantly revolutionise.
Well, I don't know. I was just thinking, I was lucky enough to meet 3 people in Northern Ireland who started a design company that became a very successful agency, actually. And on their last day of college, they sat in the refectory drinking coffee and said, "Have you got a job? No. What are you thinking of doing?" And they decided that they would start a design consultancy. And because they started not knowing what design consultancies did and how they did it, they created their own rules. And so in many ways, I mean, they became very successful, totally by accident, we would say. But so I really admired them for doing that. And again, there's no substitute for doing. I mean, one of the awful things is that when you do go and start, if you start in the wrong place, you suddenly discover after a couple of years you've got to unlearn a whole load of things. And again, for me, the analogy is that the marketing is fragmenting like crazy. Advertising is fragmenting. What I would say is every single one of those fragments is an opportunity. And so I've seen really young people come into the business and then go off very, very rapidly to set up their own companies. Do you remember there was a young couple made a young creative team made a film. They shot a film for Volkswagen, and the line for Volkswagen Polo at the time was small but remarkably strong. And it was a terrorist who blows himself up.
Yes.
And the Polo is so strong that actually he blows himself up inside the car, but nobody else. Volkswagen went absolutely apeshit. They tried to track him down. They took out injunctions.
Farid or something? It was one of his.
Anyway, as a result of it, they got offered a job in an ad agency, and after 6 months, they discovered it was just dull, terminally dull, like your anecdote earlier, Dave. And so then they started up their own viral company, and pretty soon were making really interesting, very different films to anything they would do. So my advice to young people is, listen, do it. You know, the technology is in your hands, your mobile phone. Now, Will.i.am told me that when they were, he was in the studio with the Black Eyed Peas, and there'd been 6 months argle-bargle about how they were going to advertise the new album. And what he did is he pulled out his mobile phone, he filmed the band while they were in the studio doing stuff and saying stuff to camera. He edited it on his phone. From his phone, he then just posted it up to YouTube. You know, and 16 million views later, what he's able to say is he circumvented the whole thing just by doing. So,
but see, I hear that, and I think that that's interesting. But Will.i.am was Will.i.am. But and his record label had invested massively in media to make him that person. I'm not saying he's not interesting. He's a super interesting guy. So he's just standing on the shoulder of someone else's investment, loads of people's investment, to be able to do that thing. Whereas if we were a little folk group and I videoed it and put it on YouTube, well, three people would see it.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you go back to when I first started out in advertising, if I wanted to make a film, even if I wanted to make a commercial, I was going to have to rent a camera. I did need the lights. I needed the studios. I needed to understand how film worked. I needed all of the apparatus. But today, the technology allows you to have ideas and to make them and then to share them with anybody. And when I say ideas, they don't just have to be, if you like, messages that we put out there to people, but actually ideas that become apps, ideas that about how customer service can be improved, ideas about how to set up a virtual business. Any idea you have now, you can. Pyramidia started eBay with $40. So I mean, why not?
Yeah, when I started in the industry, it was before the internet was a thing, and that meant that I was doing radio, TV, cinema, poster, and in Scotland, because you kind of did everything, direct mail, and that, to me, it was amazing. It was the only way that I got to play with media like that. Imagine that you're in your early 20s and you want to play with media, and here you go, you've got a job, and this job means that at least once a week I'm in a recording studio recording ads that I have written with actors. Jeepers, that's unbelievable. That most weeks I would be filming TV ads that would then be on air and I'd be able to see them on the television. Again, absolutely incredible. And I learned from that, and it was through the doing. Now, these days, I've got more power in GarageBand on my Mac for free than I had in a recording studio I used to work in that had one of the old desks out of Abbey Road and a couple of big reel-to-reel machines and stacks of effects. And this thing that would have cost probably over $1 million to outfit, now I can do for free, and even more on my Mac. Now, we are in a stage now that the only thing that will differentiate you from anyone else is the doing. Because I used to find that people would come to me with portfolios, and I look through the portfolio, you've got the cost of entry is a good portfolio, some good ideas. But the thing that differentiated these people, I wanted to see people who were completers. I wanted to see people who were doers. Because doing, that tenacity to finish something off, is the rarest of all skills.
I used to, when I ran a creative department, we used to write a lot of TV scripts, and I got really excited when the camcorder and the video revolution turned up, because I figured that now people could write ads, shoot them and test them and see whether they worked or not. And of course, people would bring their scripts to me and go, oh no, well, I thought I'd take this to whoever the in director is and see what he thinks. And I thought, what a cop-out, until Mark Chalmers wrote a couple of scripts for Ariel fabric conditioner, and then hired a camera over the weekend and went off to Southall and blew my mind, because what he did is he filmed a couple of Indian families talking about their laundry, and of course the colours, absolutely. And he found this long shot looking down back over all the back gardens of Southall, with all of these clotheslines, with these incredible, honestly, it was just fantastic. There was a creative guy wanting to make stuff. And for me, so we're going back 20 years now, I mean, it was tragic to see that there were so many people in ad agencies insecure enough in their own abilities as makers. They were much happier just being thinkers. Whereas today, going back to what you're saying, absolutely, you can go all the way through, make stuff, put it out there.
So, thank you for your getting to know.
Oh, by the way, go back, if I was, I can't understand why more people aren't using YouTube. Be a YouTuber. Start a podcast. There's a girl out there who's got this brilliant YouTube channel, which is about the fact that she hasn't got a job, and so her job is now that she hasn't got a job. Isn't it brilliant? I mean, I think she's got something like 1.5 million followers now, because she is living the dream.
And what do you? Because of working at Google, you've been massively exposed to YouTube. What advice would you give to someone setting up a YouTube channel, given that you're doing it yourself, or starting to on that journey? So, the three of us, we're not kind of 21-year-old yoga instructors or people on a gap year, or exploding stuff in microwaves or whatever it is, which obviously doesn't cover anywhere near the wholeness of what YouTube does. How does someone in like our older generation go about setting up a successful YouTube channel?
Well, there's the first thing. Hardly anybody in this so-called older generation has done, and so that's the first thing. I think what you have to be is interesting. And so, I mean, some of those young YouTubers, I mean, Dan is Not on Fire is really clever. And his videos are beautifully constructed. I mean, it looks like a young guy just talking to camera, but he must have, A, written those things, and secondly, they're great. They're funny and charming and interesting. Zoella also, I mean, I know she, but what she has is personality and authenticity. And so that's what I'd say. You've got to have something to say. You've got to be interesting. And verbal tics are not good, by the way. Ums and ahs and all the rest of it.
I'm going to watch my ums and ahs like a hawk for the rest of this podcast. Cool. So the last 20 minutes or so, obviously the verbal take.
Pod chat, come on. I like it.
The podcast it's called The Shiny New Object. So I said to the guys, I said, okay, look, what we're going to talk about, what bit of new technology or new marketing shiny object? And it was very difficult to get them to agree on anything, which is quite interesting in its own right. But
no, we agreed with each other. We just didn't agree with you, Tom.
The absolute caveat that we came up with, or like compromise I should say, is the human mind, its future and its relationship to technology. So Dave, you talked about how people don't think, and I'm assuming that that is in some way related to the technology that's available. Earlier we talked about the echo chamber and people taking things for granted. So what is the future of the way that technology will influence the human mind, and what does that mean for people who work in marketing? There you go. Straight up. Straight up. £5 to charity for every verbal.
Yeah, well, the nice thing about starting your own YouTube channel is, of course, you can edit it, and they do edit ruthlessly. But one of the really great moments for me working at Google is when I met Ray Kurzweil, and he was talking about AI and the inevitability of AI taking over our ability as human beings to think. And the way he expressed it was like this. He said that over the course of actually only a few million years, the amygdala used to occupy 1/8 of the cerebellum. It's now grown, so it actually occupies 7/8 of the total brain capacity. So our thinking capacity has increased.
And the amygdala is the part of the brain that does what, just to be specific?
I thought that the amygdala are the sort of little bits underneath the brain that are to do with... There's two little prongs. You've got your neocortex at the top.
Yes, the cortex.
Yeah, the amygdala is the monkey brain.
Can you edit all of that shit out?
It's fine. But it's a very relaxed podcast. Don't worry.
Okay. What Ray Kurzweil explained is that the cerebral cortex, that's right, has increased stupendously over the last couple of million years. So that now 7/8, I think he was saying, of the cerebral cortex is now occupied by, I suppose, our abilities to think. So the more we've thought about things, from the lizard brain onwards through language, through all the rest of it. So that part of the human brain has now expanded, and there is nowhere else for it to go. Already, human birth is fraught with danger. And by and large, what we're not seeing is the female of the species increasing in width, hip size. So the human brain will continue to expand, but the only place it can continue to grow is in the cloud. And that's how Ray sees AI being absolutely fundamental to the future of the human race.
So what does he mean by that? Does he mean outsourcing some functions to the cloud, or we don't have to remember anything, and if we're not connected to the internet we won't be able to remember where we live? Or
well, you've got to bear in mind that Ray's got a brain slightly I don't know, it's probably about the same size as mine, but it seems to do more stuff than mine can do. I guess what he means by that is that individually, let alone collectively, what we're going to be able to do is to use technology in order to be able to enhance our thinking, so we can think faster, deeper, more penetratively about these issues. Why? Because an awful lot of it is now going to be taken care of in the cloud.
I think that I mean, Ray's quite a techno-utopian and really believes in this, in the idea of like Singularity University is very much about stepping into a techno-utopia that humans won't have to work at some point because the machines are doing everything. I personally don't subscribe to that, and I see the flip side of that. Not that I'm sort of terribly dystopian, but I think there's certain things we have to look out for, because technology gives us yin and yang. Every single time we get a development in technology, you get just as much bad as you get good. And one of the things that we're finding with what we're doing with technology is we have outsourced, first of all, memories. We've started outsourcing memories to technology. And the one thing we're finding is what they call the Google effect. If you think something is stored on a device, or on an internet, you don't recall it. You don't remember it, because what's the point? You can search for it later. And tests have been done to show that this is what we're doing. So you search for stuff, you see it online, you find it, you don't retain it. Now that's a problem, because if the idea isn't in your head, you can't use it. So we have a problem there. Another thing that we've got is that we're outsourcing our own computing processing power to devices. And that means that it's harder now. I'm actually quite good at maths, or have been, but I have been using this for my calculator, as he says. That's for the audio subtitle there, as he pulled out his phone and tapped on it, pretending it was a calculator. So I've been using my phone as a way of doing sums rather than actually doing sums in my head. And I'm really consciously trying to do more mental arithmetic so that I don't lose those skills. And I think that that's a problem, that we're not using our brains and exercising our brains in the same way. And then the third thing that's just about to happen, thanks to AI, is that we're about to outsource our decision-making to devices, because devices will understand, here's the way that you make decisions, here's how you've been paying your bills, here's how you've been using your electricity, here's how you use your heating. We'll do that for you on your behalf, because we turned that into an algorithm, because we think that this is how you would behave. And it means we don't have to make any of these little decisions. Now, there's the plus side to that, which is that then gives us more cognitive freedom to put our minds to things. But the truth is, people are lazy. Every human development has been out of laziness.
I mean, there are a load of things that we don't want to think about. I mean, this is why brands have historically been so incredibly valuable to people, because I've used Colgate toothpaste all my life. I don't think about it. I don't want to think about it. Every time I walk into Boots, if I'm thinking about toothpaste, I'm going to go mad pretty soon. So, I read the same newspaper every day. And that's what I think AI is going to do. There are a whole load of things I don't want to think about, because actually they're pretty bloody boring. What I do want to think about are things that are altogether more challenging. I want to be able to have more time and room in my brain to be able to have ideas that are going back to what you were talking about before, going to be of some use, of some value. How can I, in my tiny little way, make this place a more beautiful world?
I agree that for people who have got the spark of curiosity and the enthusiasm and passion to do, I agree that can be good for them. In some ways, again, yin and yang, because the other thing is that if we're not retaining information, then it's hard to come up with ideas if we're using those bits of information. But for the majority of people who like to put on mental chewing gum while they sit on their arse on a settee, are they going to use the extra cognitive capability that they've got, the extra cognitive freedom, to do any more benefit, or is it just going to mean that their brain won't be used?
So my gripe on this is the daily bit of audience research that I do is getting the train into work from Forest Gate, which is like a 13-minute tube ride into Liverpool Street, but it's above ground, so everyone's on their internet. On their phones, and I just do a quick survey. What's everyone doing? Because I'm invariably listening to podcasts, right? That's my use of my time. There was one guy who had
just listen to yourself all day, every day.
There was this guy who had a Samsung phone, and in the top 2/3 of the phone he was playing Candy Crush or some rip-off version or whatever, and at the bottom third of the phone he was watching something on Netflix.
Wow.
I mean, I assume it was on Netflix, so I assume it was Candy Crush, but it was definitely a game and a thing, and I thought, fucking hell. Like, personally, my brain is really at its best in the morning. Like, you know, up to 11 o'clock, that's prime time. That's when all the best stuff happens, generally. And to blow any of that on, like, imagine how much cognitive load that is to play Candy Crush and follow Walking Dead or whatever. And I think that's scary. And you look around at people's phones and you think, you know, you've got this incredible bit of technology with access to a lot of good stuff, whether that's audio or video, and people are just playing moronic games, as you call it, like visual chewing gum. And I think that's really interesting. And is that the curse of technology, that it, you know, you don't have to work out, you don't have to get the A to Z out, you just type it in on Google Maps.
People think
I know I'll leave the house and the Nest will turn off my heating. I don't have to think to do that. But people, like, Google and Amazon are shaving a few minutes off these jobs, and I think you're right. People are just spending that on mental chewing gum.
So it used to be that we now
hang on a minute. Go back a bit. So just go back to what did people do on the train then?
Oh man, Tom, that's so unprofessional.
It's my podcast. Sorry.
No.
So what do people used to do?
I'm just saying that, I mean, when you've got dead...
Quick story, on the original tube, you could get breakfast. They had a breakfast carriage on the tube.
Nice.
Yeah. Imagine that. Fry up. Anyway, sorry, Patrick. No. You're my guest. I talked over you.
Wow. No, I love that idea. I'm just saying that it's very easy to look at people as they commute and to talk about the mental mush that they are absorbing, but I figure it was always like that. Even if you're just looking out of the train window, it's mush, you know, because you've got formless thoughts passing through it. Reading your Sun, or even if it's The Guardian, you're still absorbing a whole load of stuff and then forgetting it.
But that kind of looking out the window, your brain goes into something we call the default mode network, which is a really valuable thing. That's when we start getting daydreamy kind of things happening. That's the moment that we start coming up with ideas. That's when we can imagine scenarios and outcomes, and we think of how we fit into that, and we can empathize with people. Default mode network in the brain is basically the home of creativity. So it's that kind of the boredom, looking out the window bit is when your brain is at its best. As soon as we get into doing tasks and we put on the task network, we're all about focus, and we switch off the parts where the lovely random stuff that comes from the precuneus at the back here hits you. And I'm fascinated with the stuff that we've got just recently. It's only since the early 2000s we've been getting the learning that the brain, it's not about individual functional areas, it's about networks. And this whole sort of network approach, I'm a big fan of this looking out the window and drifting off, because that to me is when the magic happens.
And also in the newspapers, whether it's the Sun or the Guardian, there's no kind of decision architecture in there, or very little. Whereas on a game, the whole point of the game is to keep you within the game, to expose you to more adverts or to buy more upgrades. And there's a decision architecture, probably a better way to call it. So you go on, like, there's an expression I heard recently which was, you go, I just need to drop Dave a line, I'll send him a message on Facebook, and then you get distracted and you're there. And then the expression was, you regain consciousness, and you're fine. I was supposed to send Dave. And it made me feel really sad, because there's a user experience specialist somewhere in California manipulating me. So I want to speak to you specifically about a thing.
Yeah.
But his or her job is to distract me from that, just so I can look at more ads.
Yeah.
You lose consciousness. Whereas flicking through the paper, I mean, you could argue that there's design architecture within a newspaper, but it's nowhere near as powerful. So I think I'm with Dave. I think staring out the window, thinking about beautiful thoughts. What was the part of the parent?
No, I'm with Dave as well, because I couldn't agree.
So
agree more that actually it is when the brain is in limbo that it begins to, at this slightly subconscious level, come up with extraordinary stuff.
So let's leave it there. Got a couple of minutes left.
I'm just feeling really sorry for people on the train, because it is dead time.
Yeah.
And if they want to fill it with Candy Crush or Coronation Street, then
at the same time.
And it's all right.
That is.
I've got this thing where I believe that the brain has 4 modes, and you can feed your mind. That's great. You can occupy your mind. Okay, that's Candy Crush, and that's just clicking on the bit of side boob you spot on the YouTube bar at the side. Then you've got so you've got feeding your mind, occupying your mind. You've got exercising your mind. That's when you start taking the stuff and you put it into practice, either doing your job or practicing something. And then you get resting your mind. And the only one that's the least valuable one there that sadly is the majority of time, I believe, that people spend is occupying their mind, which is just basically keeping this meatball busy until you die. Now, that is the least productive out of all of them, because resting your mind is massively valuable as part to help you activate it and feed it.
I think that's brilliant. Well said. I love that.
A great place to finish. Right. So I need to thank our hosts, which is the business that I'm sitting with at the minute. It's Platform 360. So thanks to them for this space.
Thank you, Platform 360.
Where can people get in touch with you?
We haven't really talked all that much about this shiny new thing, have we? We got completely sidetracked.
I'm happy.
Oh, you're happy. Well, you're the boss.
Okay.
I'm super happy.
Listener, if you're not happy, send Tom an email and say, that's bullshit, man. We missed out on the good stuff.
So how can people get in touch with you? You mentioned the directory earlier.
Yeah, directory, magazine and resource. The website is directnewideas.com, and I'm Patrick at directnewideas.com.
I've got 23 email addresses at last count. Let me run through them. No, no. You can find me. I've got such a ridiculous name that I'm entirely Googleable. So Dave Birss, you'll find me on social media just hiding under my own name, and daveburss.com. And hopefully Tom will spell my surname right in the podcast, so you'll be able to Google me.
I will endeavour to do that. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Brilliant, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you.